So I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is a meeting of the Athens Board of Zoning Appeals. The time is 7 p.m. The date is November 13, 2007. Our board consists of 5 members and 2 alternates. An alternate takes full part in discussions of the board and becomes a voting member in the absence of conflict of interest of a regular member. So far, present this evening are John Goldsey, Betty Hollow, Roger Gruser, and myself, Muriel Frederick. We're hoping that our alternate will be here shortly. Also present are zoning administrator Steve Pearson, Paul Eschenbacher, acting secretary, and Michael Miller from the city's law director's office. The board operates according to the following procedure. The chair names and describes the case. The zoning administrator cites the specifics of the refusal. The appellant or a representative then states the case for granting the appeal. Testimony next is taken from those who support granting the appeal, then those who wish to speak in general comment, and those who support denial of the appeal. Following all testimonies, the board will receive concluding remarks from the appellant. Discussion from the floor then will be closed. The board will deliberate and render a decision. Under Athens City Code Section 230703B, the board has the power to grant such variances from the code as will not be contrary to the public interest, so that the spirit of the code shall be observed, public safety and welfare secured, and substantial justice done. Athens City Code Section 230910C requires that variances from the code shall not be granted unless the board makes specific findings of fact based directly on the evidence provided to it that each and every one of the following 6 criteria are met. The first is practical difficulty or undue hardship. There must exist a practical difficulty or an undue hardship caused by exceptional circumstances or conditions pertaining to the specific piece of property. The exceptional circumstances or conditions must that apply to the property or its extended new use must be such that they do not in general apply to properties in the same zoning district. And for number 3, it must be determined literal interpretation of the code would deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same vicinity, while granting the variance would not convey a special privilege. Number 4, it must be determined that the variance is the minimum that is required to make reasonable use of the property. Number 5, it must be determined that the granting of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent properties, nor materially impair the purposes of the code or the public interest. And lastly, the variance sought must not be of such a general or recurring nature that the situation would more reasonably be handled by changing the law. Any person who's aggrieved by the decision of the board may file an appeal to the Court of Common Pleas. Such petition must be filed within 30 days after the mailing of the board's resolution to the appellant. This evening there's one case on the agenda, I believe.
I'm sorry to be interrupting, but I thought that I was supposed to be in city council meeting, but they seem to have a special session on flood fund.
They might be doing that right at the beginning of it.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay, you can still get there. Okay.
Did the court counsel ever get a hold of you about the date?
Yes, she said it was tonight,
Okay.
and she said it was on the 3rd floor, but then when I got there, it really seemed like it was a meeting for something else.
Not what you were,
That's where we need
they'll
to
get to you next.
Sorry.
All right, talk to you later.
Anyway, gave me an opportunity to get my voice back, but I didn't. Never mind. That's the last of the 6 criteria, is that it not be, the variance sought must not be of a general or recurring nature such the situation would more reasonably be handled by changing the law. Okay. Then, I've done that, and we've only got one case on the agenda tonight. It's number 0716V for 62 Sunnyside Drive, which is zoned R1. Jack Stouffer is our appellant. The board is required by law to take testimony under oath. Anyone wishing to speak, please stand to be sworn. Do you swear that the testimony you will give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Yes, ma'am.
And I provided you with summons in regard to a case recently decided by the board. And you see the appellant's filing documents. And I provided, it says, there are written documents that have to be provided. I already passed those over to the law director's office, and I'm waiting on the transcript. So,
Okay.
and I should have that within the next day or two, and then I'll take that over to the law director's office, and they'll respond to this. So there isn't, right now, there isn't anything that you have to do,
That's good.
any of the board members.
At any point, will there be?
That's my question.
Yeah, there may, well, not at this point, there isn't anything that you need to do. The only other thing, is Frederick, there's your copy of the comprehensive plan.
Actually, unless it's a new version.
No, it isn't. Well, I had an extra one, and I looked at the minutes of the last meeting to see who wasn't here. That's,
I wasn't, but I got it at the previous, I guess. I don't know.
I didn't get one.
You didn't get one?
Ah, that's
Here
who
you
it
go.
is.
Copy of the comprehensive plan. There's some sections in the code that say the board has to look at things in light of the comprehensive plan. And for example, you're gonna get something probably at your next meeting with a recommendation from the planning commission regarding a business use variance. And that same section of the zoning code says the planning commission has to make their recommendation with consideration for the comprehensive plan. That was scheduled for the November 1st meeting, the planning commission. They didn't have a quorum that day. It's on the agenda for this Thursday, the 15th, and so hopefully then they'll have a recommendation to forward to the board after that meeting Thursday. So it's a request for a business use variance.
Steve, do you have any cases for December?
Not right now. None other than the one I just mentioned.
The one on West State.
What's the business?
There's a vacant lot the gentleman wants to purchase, and he wants to build a carpenter shop there in a B1 zone, neighborhood business zone.
Down on the flat of West State, down towards the water plant.
Right across from the Innovation Centers where the
Okay.
vacant lot's at.
Oh, did we have something about that before? Someone said it'd be too noisy.
Something, there was concerns about it being, but it wasn't that property, was it? It wasn't that business, was it?
I had one recently, about a year ago, about a yoga studio and an accessory structure. That one may be coming back at the next meeting, because more than a year has gone by, so the case can be reheard.
Is there anything different about it, other than just the year having passed?
No, just the year having passed, and there've been classes, from what I understand, there have been yoga classes inside the home. So it's permitted inside the principal dwelling structure as a home occupation, just not permitted in accessory structure.
The accessory structure was, however, was permitted as long as it wasn't used for business purposes. It's my understanding, right?
As long as it's attached to the house.
Well, it can be detached from the house if it's going to be just sitting there, but if it's going to be used for business purposes, it has to be attached.
Didn't they offer to build 160?
No, they didn't want to, because it would mess up the
They
view.
mentioned
The-
it,
the-
I know.
It was mentioned by
Yeah.
somebody, but the view line, the view would be ruined by, and they did.
asking for.
That was one of the suggestions
That's
they
what
made.
Was it?
suggestion.
I
That
thought
was-
she was asking to do it without the,
I don't think
without the
so.
attachment.
I don't, well, I have a very bad memory, sorry.
Oh.
It was a separate building, they had a
But
separate
she
building.
wanted to attach them, and we said no tunnels above ground.
Oh, I see. I thought it was that she didn't want to do a tunnel of
Well,
any
she-
sort, and she wanted to be able to do it without tunneling.
Well,
Right.
of course, but if need be, she would have done a tunnel.
Ha, I misunderstood. I misremembered. It's very possible. I have no problem misremembering a lot of
Good
things.
evening. Hey.
You don't need to hurt him. You should hurt one of the other people who didn't come. Good evening. Well, now, we may proceed with Steve citing the specifics of the refusal of the case number 0716B for 62 Sunnyside, unless we need to continue with our discussion of the other. No, okay. Okay.
The packet of information that you have, there's a Athens City tax plat of the area, basically to show, to illustrate the size of the lots in that area. I think that's the biggest thing you can pick up off this drawing. Most of the lots in that area are 55 by 100, so they're 5,000 square feet, which is a 3,000 square foot reduction from the minimum lot area of 8,000 square feet that's now required for new subdivisions. Over on Elmwood, that's a different subdivision. Those lots are a little narrower, but they're a little bit deeper. So those lots do get closer to 8,000 square feet, but these other lots are smaller. Right now, there's a single-family residential house located on the property. There's also a garage that's 21.6 by 18.8. And the appellant, Mr. Jack Stauffer, would like to replace that garage, maintaining the existing non-conforming setbacks on the rear and on the right side. I think that one little drawing that I put in there illustrated what he wanted to maintain. 3 feet on the right-hand side, 1.5 on the back. I provided you with letters from both those adjoining property owners. Mr. Jones on the rear where the setback's only 1.5 feet. Mr. Stedman on the side where the setback is only 3 feet. And neither one of those neighbors are opposed to this. As a matter of fact, I think they both endorsed it because it appears the condition of the existing garage is in need of some repair. 30% lot coverage is figured on the lot size, not on an 8,000 square foot lot. So you're already at a disadvantage percentage, square footage wise, because your percentage is based on a lower area to begin with. 34%, I believe, is the request, where 30% is the maximum lot coverage permitted. So it's 4% over. And to maintain those existing non-conforming setbacks of 4.5 feet in the front, 3 feet on the right-hand side, where 5 feet is the minimum setback. That's permitted for new construction. Also in the file is Mr. Stauffer's answer to the questions that are required by code to be answered by the appellant. And this is to help you, when you go through your 6 findings, trying to help you to determine the appellant's point of view on the hardship and difficulty. And then just tonight, I provide you with a letter from Mr. Stedman, who lives at 84, and then there was in the information that I provided to you, a letter from Mr. John Jones, who lives on Elmwood, who's the immediate neighbor to the rear. 74 Elmwood. Unless you have any questions besides that, I don't have anything else.
Any questions, anybody? Okay, good. Then Mr. Stauffer, how do I say your name? Stauffer, sorry, I've been calling you Stauffer for a long time. Mr. Stauffer, would you have a seat, please?
He probably answers to you.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. Okay. All right. You want to go over your
Yeah, I didn't-
request?
Yeah, I don't have a copy of that actual list of the 6 things that I'm supposed to
Oh, there it is.
point
You
out.
wanna look at that? And here's yours.
Okay,
Do you want yours?
all right. Well, am I supposed to address these one by one? I also.
Well,
or just
you
go
can
by
present it
each?
however you feel would make your case best. And if this
Okay.
will help any, help yourself.
Well, I'm hoping this is fast and painless for all involved, mostly, of course, and including myself. The garage that I want to replace, I bought the house back in February, and I don't know if any of you folks had a chance to view the garage in question,
did.
but it is leaning slightly to the
Yes.
right, and there's been some sort of valiant attempt to right the building, but it was may be successful to some degree, but it's still leaning to the right. And it's not quite big enough for 2 cars. And in this day and age, about everybody that has 2 cars would like to keep them undercover, including myself. So that's the reason I'm here. Because the garage that's there, one, isn't big enough to suit the needs, at least of my family. So I'd like the garage to be a little bit bigger. I won't make it any taller or no more than like just 2 or 3 or 4 inches taller than it is now, just because of the pitch of the roof. And it'll be a nicer structure for the neighbors to look at, as well as, of course, a nicer structure for me to enjoy. If you looked at the file, you saw that Mr. Stedman, who is on my immediate side, as his letter points out, the house numbers don't indicate that he's my next door neighbor, but indeed he is. And he makes reference, I know when you guys decide a case, you never set precedent, but he pointed out to me and points out in this letter that he apparently received the same variances that I'm seeking when he was building his garage. The number of years or whatever board that was, I'm not sure about. And Mr. John Jones, who lives behind me, we've had occasion to do business in the past when I was in business, and I used to be his neighbor when I lived at 64 Elmwood, when I also sought a variance of either very similar or exactly the same, because there was an old junky garage over there that I wanted to tear down and build a new one, and I had received that variance. The other people on the list, Mr. Metters, who lives across the street, he did not inquire and I did not approach. And the lady who lives directly across the street, Kirsten, did not bring it up to me. I spoke with Mr. Zulik briefly, and of course it's apparent if you looked at the plat map or had the additional information that Mr. Zulik apparently enjoys in excess of 30% lot coverage and has a 2-car garage, as does Mr. Stedman. So I'm trying to ask for no more than the minimum, increase my property values and enjoyment of my property, as well as, of course, then it will improve the aesthetics to the neighbors. I will not build a garage, of course, any closer to Mr. Stedman than it is now. And in regards to Mrs. Richter and Mr. Jones in the rear, as you folks may or may not have noticed, there's been a brick wall constructed between the properties on Elmwood and Sunnyside. And actually, I'm not going to build the garage back as far back on the lot that it is now. It's actually going to be a little farther away from Mr. Jones and the Richter's property line, excuse me, by, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 inches, so as to not disturb the existing nice brick wall that is right in between the properties. So it really won't be as far to the rear. It'll be moved up slightly, but just ever so slightly. It'll be slightly farther away from the property line, but definitely not, of course, within the 5 feet that's requested. And for me to be able to build the garage 5 feet from the property line of Mr. Stedman and 5 feet from the property line of the Richters and the Joneses would then put the garage too close to the house to logistically get the cars in. So I feel that I'm seeking the minimum variance. And I didn't bring I ran off because I
Some glasses.
overslept.
The next one is,
Yeah, these are 2.5.
The exceptional circumstances.
the absence of detriment, I think, is the next
Well,
one.
I think
Oh,
absence
you-
of, I think absence of
You've already
detriment
spoken
have,
to- you've
I think
spoken to
that's,
that, yeah.
I think that's been addressed in as much as, I'm making a safer building for myself and my neighbors. You know, and I'll bring up the point that with a heavy 2-foot wet snow, that could just push that building over the edge and ruin my girlfriend's car and Mr. Stedman's fence. Equal property rights. Like I say, there's people on the street in the neighborhood who are enjoying 2-car garages that may or may not be in compliance with the code and may or may not have been granted a variance, but I like to do things by the book, and I'm here to request the minimum variance to be able to rebuild the garage, make it a nice looking structure and safe. I don't think it will be of any detriment to the neighborhood. I think it will actually enhance the neighborhood by being a nicer building, increasing my property values, and if you believe in the neighborhood being better, it'll increase the view so that people aren't looking at a leaning building. They'll be looking at a nice new building, which I will build architecturally to match my house with the same siding and the same wooden shingles for the decoration, and the same wooden shingles in the peak painted to match the house, and I think it will be aesthetically pleasing. And not of a general nature, I'm going to go with the, I don't think everybody else's garage is leaning to the right and in danger of collapse, and I'd like to build a nice building. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. All right. Has, any questions?
Mr. Christopher, sorry. I think the size of your garage is reasonable. I mean, it's not really outrageously big, but from what and these are not to scale, by the way. There's two drawings in there. And from what I glanced at your garage, it seems that even if you move about a couple foot on one side to 5 feet, it's not going to make that much of a difference, you know, in terms of getting to the garage or not. So why don't you move it a couple feet, so that would be 5 feet on one side at least, and you comply with it.
Request 26 by 26.
Because none of these drawings are going to scale anyway. And
The building I requested as well, then I request
Did you actually go and
26
see
by
the
26.
yard?
Well, sir,
Looks like that we can move maybe the garage to at least, you know, not the 34% versus 30%, you know, I have no problem myself with it, but I think maybe you can comply maybe with the setbacks.
Mm.
well,
I have no objection to the setbacks remaining as they currently are, and I don't see
either.
why you, I mean, I don't
That's just
see
a part
that
of
you
the
would.
variance, you know, just a
Yeah,
part
I
of it.
just don't know that you would gain a
well,
great deal.
I
enforcing
mean,
the-
I understand that I can move the garage 2 feet, we'll say, to the left, and I understand that I can move the garage 3.5 more feet closer to the back of my building. However, then, when you factor in the steps that come down from my back porch, and the fact that the garage has been shifted 2 feet farther to the left, and then the fact that I want to add approximately 4 more feet in width, and then you figure the length of a car having to come back the driveway and try to get over into that bay, it's not going to be logistically friendly, and it's going to cut down on the green space.
Cut
It
down on the
won't be
green
real
space a
easy,
lot.
just even the way you're planning on
Exactly.
doing it, you're still gonna.
I'm thinking
have
about
to
getting
use
a little bit smaller truck to make it just more user-friendly. So,
Yeah.
point well taken, but I'd like to ask for what I think I wanted to ask for. That's still what I want to ask for.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll lose a lot of backyard that way too.
And I'll point out, and it may or may not be a factor to you folks, but when spring comes and you have occasion, if you grant this and you have occasion to come down by there, you're going to see a really nice structure with all new concrete, with drains in the concrete, so the water won't be running off into my backyard and into Mr. Stedman's backyard, as well as later on in the summer, you're going to see a very finely landscaped yard, both in front for the passerby to enjoy, as well as the backyard.
Landscaping's always nice. Any other questions? All right. We don't seem to have a great number of people here wanting to speak in general comment or in opposition. So, if you have anything further you'd like to say, this is the time. Otherwise, we're going to close discussion and
Okay, I
Get
just
started.
want to point out
Okay.
that Mr. Jones has given me a very nice endorsement as far as how he believes I conduct business and complete my projects in the past, and I guarantee you that I will not disappoint Mr. Jones, nor the board, nor the citizens in what they're going to see when I'm done, as well as Mr. Stedman indicating that he had been granted similar variances at some point in time by some board, which may or may not have any bearing on the situation, and that we've got a building leaning to the right that is not aesthetically pleasing and could be considered dangerous with the heavy snow on the roof. And,
Any building that leans is hazardous.
yeah, it's just a matter of when the obvious is going to happen and how it's going to occur and whether anybody's going to be standing by it or what vehicle might be sitting in it. And point out that none of the other folks that were notified, I did have a chance to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Richter over the back fence, and they didn't voice objection. I had a chance to speak with Mr. Smucker, who lives to my immediate west. He didn't voice any objections to me, and they're not here. And like I say, Mr. Zulik, who lives across the street, has a 2-car garage, and I'm sure is enjoying at least 30% lot coverage or more. And I'm willing to take my chances with your judgment.
okay. All right, in that case, we're ready to proceed with either discussion or if anybody's do we need to do any further discussion? All right, is that somebody ready to make a motion for?
Yes, I move that we grant a variance to property at 62 Seaside Drive in section 2311, table A, schedule of bulk controls, and section 230311, to permit construction of an accessory structure that would create lot coverage of 34%, where 30 is the permitted minimum, is the permitted maximum, and side yard setbacks of 1.5 and 3 feet, where 5 feet is the permitted minimum.
Is there a second?
Yes.
Okay, great, all right. How do we find with regard to the practical difficulty? What is the practical difficulty that Mr.
Got a
Stover-
small lot,
That makes it difficult.
and
It's a,
2-car garage is just almost a necessity anymore. 1-car garage is just,
Well-
1 car's gonna be sitting out on the street.
well, and considering the fact that, you know, we're always looking for opportunities to get cars off the
Off the
street,
street.
that provides a
That's the whole-
difficulty for everybody, not just Mr. Stauffer. All right. Exceptional circumstances, that don't in general apply to properties in the same zoning district.
Pointed out this building happens to be leaning, and although it's not exceptional in this neighborhood to have a small lot, you could not have this size lot now.
Yeah,
build a
right.
lot, So,
All of our rules are seeming to be assuming much larger lots, but, preservation of equal property rights
we
seems,
have in fact given variances on that street and in that neighborhood because of the small lots and garages that needed to be rebuilt.
and, yeah, and other people have garages that accommodate 2 cars. Minimum, is this variance request the minimum required to?
Well, it's basically building in the footprint except for extending a bit on the left side.
Mhm.
So the garage will be a small amount bigger, increasing lot coverage slightly, but the setbacks will remain the same.
That seems fairly minimal. How about detriment? Is there any detriment granting this
Mhm.
variance?
I see not.
Sounds like it actually would be an improvement for, as far as the neighbors are concerned, the ones who've spoken. And is this variance something that would be handled by changing the law because it's so general or recurring, minor recurrence? All right, that being the case, are we ready to take a vote?
Yes,
You want to start?
yes.
Yes?
Yes.
I would know.
Okay. But I'll vote yes, so you have your variance.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll build yourself a nice garage.
I'll do that. Thank you very much.
Who's gonna build your garage?
Huh?
Who's gonna build it?
Me and my friend Marty, who's a qualified carpenter.
Oh,
It will be a nice garage, aesthetically and mechanically.
Are you gonna have, you say mechanically, are you gonna have,
Well-
the door's gonna be automatic opening kind of doors and all
Yeah,
that
I'm
stuff?
gonna run a gas line back there so I can have a little heat in there.
Oh, that's nice. Well, if that being the case, how come you didn't consider just attaching it to your house?
It's not enough width.
Is there not? I didn't even look at it at the
Between the
time.
house and the property line isn't wide enough for it would be a one-car garage,
Oh,
and it's
that's right.
smaller
It'd be
than it
even
is
smaller
now.
than what you already have
Because I
because
have
it's
to do that little
already-
jog.
That's why it's
That's
still got.
right. That's the problem, isn't it? I'd forgotten.
Would have required a greater variance if it was attached, because you had a 30-foot rear yard instead of a 5-foot.
You're gonna go just three places.
What kind of heat back
That's
there?
good.
Hmm?
I mean, oh, you know what, I'm gonna ask you afterwards. I think, since we've attended to everything else, the meeting, do we have
Just one other
other?
thing, I want to remind everyone that there are term expirations coming up. Mr. Golsey's seat and Mr. Lavelle's will both expire on January 31st.
Oh,
So, just as Mr. Gruser's did last year.
doesn't he look good for an expired person?
The appointments to the Board of Zoning Appeals are by the mayor. They have to be confirmed by council. So because we have a new mayor coming in January 1st, I'd recommend that you wait until then and apply to that mayor if you want to continue.
Oh,
But do that as quickly as possible. That way, if there is, the confirmation process could proceed and it could even be in place. So right away then in February, if you wanted to remain on the board, you'd still be on the board.
How long are appointments?
3 years.
And you re-upped, you did yourself in for 3 whole lives.
I figure I've got 2 years left.
I hope we got more than that left.
The
Okay.
appointments are staggered every 3 years. The only person who happens to be in that position is Mr. Gruser. He's by himself, and other members have been appointed in pairs, including the alternates.
Okay. Okay, well then, we're advised, and thank you very much, and now we are adjourned.